The Supreme Court just struck down Trump's tariffs in a 6-3 decision. Done. Gone. One of the most talked about trade policies in modern history. And the S&P, it only went up 0.7%. That's it. Not 7%, not 2%, 0.7%. That's basically a rounding error. That's a normal day in the market. I want to explain to you exactly why the market barely even blinked on this news. Because if you think this ruling means that tariffs are going away and that your portfolio is going to skyrocket, you're going to be very wrong very fast. If you're new here, this is where we cut through the noise of stories just like this every single week. Smash that subscribe button so you never miss out. Now, stay with me through this until the end because we're going to discuss who the real winners might be if the tariff refunds actually happen, and the answer might surprise you. On February 20th, 2026, the Supreme Court ruled that Trump cannot use the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or as you'll hear people call it, IEEPA, to impose his sweeping trade agenda. To provide some context for those who have been sleeping under a rock, what we're discussing is the Liberation Day tariffs that were applied in April of 2025. These tariffs were broadly applied to almost every single country in the world, some of them getting up to 40%, which caused the S&P 500 to tank nearly 10% the next day. Companies were panic importing, restructuring supply chains, and overall it was a hectic time for everyone. Lower courts struck them down, the federal courts upheld them, and ultimately this ended up in the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts wrote this on behalf of the majority. IEEPA contains no reference to tariffs or duties. Based on two words separated by 16 others, regulate and importation, the president asserts the independent power to impose tariffs on imports from any country of any product at any rate for any amount of time. Those words cannot bear such weight. 6 of the 9 justices agreed that Trump does not have the power to impose these tariffs under the IEEPA authorities. But even Justice Kavanaugh, who voted to uphold the tariffs, mentioned that this ruling ultimately won't impact the president's authority over tariffs all that much. So even the guy who disagreed with the ruling said that this isn't going to change a whole lot. Knowing Trump, he immediately came out and said that the justices who disagreed are a disgrace and immediately signed an executive order to apply a 10% tariff across the board using a different law. By Saturday, he had already raised that 10% to 15%, and this is all before the ink of the Supreme Court ruling could even dry. So that's what happened. But now we have to talk about why none of this really moved the market and why the answer to that question started in a press conference and not in a courtroom. So here's what everyone's missing about Friday's market reaction. The lack of movement wasn't confusion. It wasn't the market being slow. It was the market telling you that this was expected, already priced in, and that the court ruling was not a surprise to anyone. And the reason this ruling was irrelevant was because of one person, Scott Bessent. Bessent, Trump's own Treasury Secretary, said in December of 2025 that if the Supreme Court strikes down their use of IEEPA, they could recreate the exact tariff structure just using different sections of the Trade Act. He said this out loud, in public, and on record. Think about what that actually means. Every hedge fund, trading algorithm, retail trader, anyone in the market knows that even if these tariffs got struck down, they have the tools to recreate them. Ultimately, the Supreme Court ruling didn't matter. The tariffs are gonna stay. The administration's plan B was not a secret. It was a press release. And then Trump proved it. Within hours, he applied a new 10% tariff, which immediately went up to 15% on Saturday. Let me show you the actual scoreboard now, because after the Supreme Court ruling, the tariff picture looks a lot like business as usual rather than what some people would want, which would be no tariffs. The IEEPA tariffs that the Supreme Court just killed accounted for nearly half of the tariff revenue that the United States was getting. Of the total amount, here's what's still standing after the ruling. Section 232 tariffs, justified under national security, completely untouched. 25% on steel and aluminum, 25% on automobiles, tariffs on semiconductors, copper, and other strategic materials, all of it is still running. Section 301 tariffs targeting China, still in place. And now a new 10 to 15% global tariff baseline under Section 122. Signed Friday night, Section 122 has a 150-day statutory cap, which means Congress will have to weigh in before it expires. But that's a fight for later. Right now, those tariffs are live. And Bessent already signaled that Section 301 investigations are coming for our major trading partners, which means that they can ultimately layer additional tariffs on top of what they have if needed. The administration is not retreating on tariffs. They're just pulling different levers and using different tools to ultimately get to the same spot. This is not a new chapter in trade policy. This is essentially the same place with different words. Okay, now we have the wild card, the part of the story that is so uncertain. Refunds. The federal government collected an estimated $160 billion under the IEEPA tariffs. And since the courts ruled that from day one these tariffs were illegal, the question is whether any of this money is going to get paid back. Here's what we actually know. The Supreme Court did not even mention refunds, literally not a word. Justice Kavanaugh did call that out, however, in his dissent against the majority. He wrote that the court left nothing on how or whether they're going to return the money that was collected. That entire question got kicked down to the Court of International Trade. Over 1,500 companies have already filed suit in order to get in line for a potential refund. So, who might actually benefit if this money comes back? The obvious answer might be the big importers like Costco and Walmart, because they spend so much money and write the biggest checks to the government. But here's the problem with that narrative. These big companies, they just pass the costs on to the consumer. So, ultimately the political argument is, why should Costco pocket a $500 million refund if they push the costs onto you at the register? That friction is real, and it's gonna tremendously slow down the refund process. Here's who I actually think the real winners of a refund might be: small and mid-sized manufacturers and importers. The businesses that were importing goods and raw materials but weren't able to pass on the cost to the next guy. They didn't have the pricing power, and they didn't have the teams of logistics experts to reroute their supply chains. They just absorbed the hit straight to their margin. For those businesses, a refund isn't a political talking point. They didn't pass the costs on. Those costs hit them in the bottom line. There won't be any arguments slowing their refunds down. The catch is the timeline for this is brutal regardless if you're Costco or a small importer. Analysts are already suggesting that any meaningful refund will take a year to 18 months at minimum. Ultimately, it's gonna be a mess and a bureaucratic nightmare divvying out refunds to all these companies, and it's just not gonna be a quick or easy process for anyone. Bottom line, if the money exists and the refunds are real, the businesses that ate the costs are gonna benefit the most because they'll be seeing a direct refund, so to speak. All right, let's zoom all the way out and see what the picture looks like from here. First, you can expect more noise because fundamentally nothing changed. The tariff regiment was rebuilt in real time. Scott Bessent told you this was going to happen, and Trump executed right away. The Section 122 tariffs have a clock of 150 days, so you can expect another tariff battle in the future, and the cycle continues. Second, the macroeconomics for the economy haven't changed. Inflation isn't coming down because of this ruling, and GDP isn't going to surprise to the upside. Nothing in the fundamental economics have changed because ultimately the tariffs they are applying are going to be about the same. The same headwinds exist and the same tailwinds exist. The Fed knows it, and the tariff rulings don't change what's in the data. Third, don't chase a refund pop. Even though I said small to medium importers are set to benefit from a refund if it happens, this process will take 12 to 18 months, and everything is already going to be priced in. The last thing I want to leave you with is the lesson that Friday gave us, what it's actually telling us about where we're at in the tariff cycle. The era of tariff headlines moving the market 5, 6, 7% in a day are over. The market has learned this administration's playbook. It listens when Scott Bessent says they have a plan B. It's pricing the outcomes before we have them. And when the ruling or the news drops, we see 0.7% change. This is not the market being asleep. This is everyone being awake and acclimated to this administration's trade policies. The Supreme Court handed Trump a historic legal defeat on Friday, and the 0.7% response tells you everything you need to know about how the market took it. One mechanism got struck down, but their intentions didn't move. The refund story is real but slow, and ultimately doesn't change the macros of the market. Let me know what you think about the Supreme Court ruling in the comments. I'm so curious to see how everyone's taking the news. I'll reply to every single one. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful week. Peace!